Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today we have two guests that have been on the channel previously. We have Deborah Grace and we have Micah Dank. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you. It's nice to be here.
So today's a very different type of conversation. And I think this is going to be very interesting for listeners and viewers. Both of you see the Bible as not being literal, but you approach it from slightly different perspectives, but there's still a bit of a middle ground in terms of how you perceive the Bible. Can you talk to us about how you respectively see the Bible, but also I'm also interested to hear how you perceive each other's non-literal view of the Bible.
You want to start, Deb, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
There's a lot of overlapping in our works. We both come from a very religious background. We both broke free from it, and we both started attacking it the way we did. Now, she comes from a Christian background. I come from a Jewish background, a very conservative Jewish background. And it never sat well with me, even when I was 9, 10, and I'd have all these questions like, well, somebody's got to be right, or is anybody right? And it turns out that nobody's right. Basically, she comes from it where she was in the church and she uses the Bible to disprove itself. Okay. Which to me is a much more grandiose and noble way of approaching it than taking the Bible and using the Bible to prove itself. Okay. Because it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy when you quote the Bible. Now, it's important to know too that the Bible is made up of 7 sciences. Okay, it's metaphysical, it's astrological. That's where I come in with the astrology. It's also anatomical, it's alchemical, it's spiritual, it's esoteric, and it's mythology. They are not by any means literal, historical, reality, or original. And I explore all that. I only teach one of the 7 sciences. So by all means, I don't have the answer to everything. But I do know that from my knowledge, the astrological point is the oldest science, and it's also the one that's most prevalent. And what really started to blow my mind was when I started using astrology to decode books that had nothing to do with the Bible. That's what really kind of took me by surprise. I do a podcast with a guy named Rex Bear. We've become quite close. He's on the Leak Project. And he told me one time, he was like, just look at the Enuma Elish, see if you could find anything. And I did. So that led to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Hammurabi, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And then finally, when I was ready for it, I opened up the Quran and I did the same thing. And it's the basis of all of them. Okay, so the Bible isn't original by any means, but it is an incredible book. You can't take that away from it. I can't write that deeply. I always say, personally, one of my favorite quotes is from John Dominic Crossan, who says, my point once again is not that these ancient people told literal stories and we are now smart enough to take them symbolically, but that they told them symbolically and we are now dumb enough to take them literally. And if you've heard of my work, if you've seen my work, I unpack these incredibly deep metaphors that form patterns in the sky. And once you're able to start doing that, you can kind of start seeing how it's being used against us in modern day. Whereas what Deb does is she knows the Bible front to back, and she will take a pass. I saw her talking to somebody online one time where somebody said that the Bible is loose and open for interpretations, and then she hit him with 1 Peter, where he said the Bible is not for interpretation. Like, she's got an answer for everything within the Bible. And yeah. I love that. I see her work. I don't know how we came across it, because I don't know anybody that is as passionate about doing what I'm doing as you are doing what you're doing. And there's definitely overlap with us. See, Deb doesn't deny my astrotheology in the Bible at all. In fact, she's quite open to it. But what she does is she uses the Bible to disprove itself, which I think is incredible. And I think she has a breadth of knowledge. And I think she has enough exposure where she's put in her Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours into it, where she basically does it. She's like me. She has a book. I chose to go a little bit different. I teach this through a fiction series, because it's easier to get it out to the masses. You know, I have a publicist. We're trying to get a TV producer on board to try and teach this stuff. So we approach things a little bit differently, but I'm always keeping tabs on her and seeing what she's doing. And I've used some of her decodings too.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. So I'll just pick up where you left off there. I see your work as totally instrumental. It takes what all of the older religions have drawn from. And if you look at, like you said, the Enuma Elish, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the writings of Thoth, wherever you, or the Quran, wherever you look, you're going to find stories that pattern off of the stars, not the other way around. And finding somebody who is questioning their faith, specifically in Christianity, because that's my wheelhouse, it either way, if you go at somebody with the scriptures, and because that's the only way you're going to get to somebody who is a diehard Christian, or even where I was in the last 5 years of my faith was in Hebraic roots, Messianic Hebraic roots. And so I was privy to a lot of those Jewish traditions and feasts and rituals that you were, but from a Messianic viewpoint. But if you go at somebody using the scriptures, you may get cracks in it. You may be able to tumble that house of cards, but there is so much indoctrination there that it's hard for them to break free of that. Now, if you go at them at an astrotheological level and say, hey, look, you have the story of Elisha and Elijah and the 42 bears, or the 42 children and the 2 bears, and you pair that next to what you see in the stars, they may have a more open and embracing mindset to listen to that than they would attacking their deeply indoctrinated, deeply rooted faith. And so pairing these two together, or at least overlapping, as you said, in getting this message out to other people, wherever it strikes the person, you're going to have a crack there. And I think it's kind of a beautiful marriage in this interview, at least, to say that you have you can look at these religions through multiple lenses and not myopic. And that's one of the big things that I see in any religion, is it's a singular myopic lens that you're interpreting your worldview from. And so if you can open that up and branch it out, it just makes it so much easier for people to accept and to at least look at and chew on for a little bit.
Right. Well, I have my best friend, my brother John. He has a daughter. She's 6. He's into esoteric stuff. He gets more into the Anunnaki, Enki and Enlil. He's more into that kind of stuff. But he follows my work. You know, he has my movie posters up on his wall, and we've had many, many discussions about this kind of stuff. And he's putting his daughter through religion. And I'm sitting there going, John, with everything that you know, why are you doing this? And he said something interesting to me. He said, you cannot understand what the Bible is unless you understand how it's being told now. What I mean by that is you're not going to learn about Jonah and the whale. You're not going to learn about Cain and Abel unless you read the book literally and commit that to memory, and then you can unpack it. So what he said is he's giving her the foundation for that, and then he's going to end up giving her my book series, The Esoteric, when she's older. He's going to help her, guide her through that. And I'm thinking, how do you get somebody who may not have cared about the Bible, or who thought that it was, you know, what I mean is, how do you get someone who's brand new to the Bible to learn it in the way that we teach it without teaching them the way that the religious teach it first?
I actually don't agree with that methodology, but I am certainly not the parent, and I'm not going to step on anybody's toes there. But having been there, having been that person, that child who was taught it from such a young age, I was told, no, 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 Santa Claus isn't real, but this over here is. And that was a big disservice to me, because I imagine how much further I would be in the philosophical studies in my life right now. Imagine if I had been given that freedom without the oppression of the Bible to further my education to so much more levels. Imagine how much open my mind would have been to accepting people of other lifestyles years ago rather than just a few years ago. I can't even imagine how much better and more enriching and fulfilled my life would have been without religion. And I think that does anybody a very large disservice to indoctrinate them and then unpack them later. You don't know if tomorrow is promised.
Right.
You don't know if you wake up the next day. So to put that on a little child, that's just my opinion. So I hope I'm not offending anybody. I'm
No, not
just
at all.
hoping to bring a different perspective to this situation,
Right.
and hopefully enlighten other people to see it from that perspective, having been somebody who was indoctrinated from a very young age, from birth.
Right. But I would also say people like me and you, we have the driving, like they did a study, right? They did a study on the most successful people, and they took like 100 of them and they analyzed them psychologically. They sat down, they did this, whatever. They found they all had one thing in common,
Grit.
and it was grit. You remember that, right?
I
You know
saw
that
that
study.
study. I saw that
Yeah.
study.
They had
Yeah.
grit, and that's
Yeah.
what you need to have. Now that is
Right.
driven by your exposure to who you were exposed
Right.
to as a young person. If I didn't
Right.
have such a religious upbringing, I might not be
Mhm.
who I am today. And the same for you too. So when you sit there and you say,
I
it's only been a
understand.
few years, how much further could I be along? I say to you, you've always had this in you, you know, and you
Well,
are using,
I've always had the grit. Well,
right.
I can't say I had grit when I was 16, because I know I didn't. But as an
Right.
adult, when I was about 25, I can remember that's when my grit started developing. But I was still under that, I was still in that box, and I couldn't go
Would you
outside those walls of
not,
the box.
would you not have, I mean, you know the Bible inside and out.
Mhm.
Would you have been the same way had you not been exposed to it and taught it the way you were?
I mean, I think there are certain characteristics of anybody that are still going to develop regardless of what their upbringing is or what their environment has been. I think there are
Right.
still things, like I still think my mom would have been incredibly compassionate and loving, and I still think my dad would have been a hard ass and unloving. I still think that I would have learned how to grow from that, and I still would have been, from the earliest memories that I can recall, I remember thinking, I don't want to be an angry, bitter person. I don't want to be a mean person. I don't want to be um, unloving or uncaring. I don't want to, but I was in the chains of religion, looking at people from, the LGBTQ plus community, and hating on them. And you're wrong, and you should turn from that, and trying to proselytize other people and push my viewpoint on them. That was unloving. I didn't
Right.
realize that until I was out of it. But obviously, I think, yes, I understand that my experiences have shaped who I am today. I still think there would have been a foundation that is still there.
Right.
I think it's beneficial. Sure, I think it's beneficial to teach what is in the Bible to people from a young age, but encompass that every time with, this isn't literal.
Right. You know, there's a person that I follow on Twitter. I don't know if you do, but do you know who Megan Phelps Roper is?
I don't recognize the name. I'm sorry.
Megan Phelps. She's from the Phelps family, the Westboro Baptist Church.
Okay. I mean, I know the
You familiar
church,
with the
but I
West?
don't know the name. Yes.
So she broke through from that. They're the
Oh,
ones that
wow.
have the website godhatesfags.com. She broke through from that and built a life.
Good.
And I
Good.
follow her. It's an incredible story.
Hmm.
You know, I too come from an overbearingly loving mother and a very distant father. Not very distant, but in the sense that he worked overnight. So when I'd be home after school, he'd be sleeping. I never really saw him. So, you know, and the only thing I can ever remember, like we never went to Disneyland. We never really went on vacations. The only time I really remember going anywhere was for like Passover. And that like started to like frustrate me, you know, and it was just rough and it was annoying. And
Hmm.
you know, oh man. So I just, you know, one day I just came across Jordan Maxwell and Santos Spinocchi, you know, on
Yeah.
YouTube in 2012. And
I
then
keep.
I studied them for months, for hours and hours and hours at a time, for months. And then I started seeing patterns in the Bible. And I remember the girl that I was living with at the time, she looks at me and she goes, "Why can't you just read the Bible the way everyone else does?" And I was like, no. So basically, you know, that one didn't work out anyway. But then I came home and I had my books, and I'm wrapping up the 8th book now too. So the series is basically done. I'm wrapping it up, but like if some weird shit happens in America, I can always open up a 9th book, because the books are
Okay.
very parallel to the things. Like I wrote book 4 in 2017. I predicted a pandemic with a vaccine.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
2017. Yeah. So the story about basically, I'd watched the movie Bird Box. Have you seen Bird Box?
I have. Yes. Yes, I have.
Okay, so it's basically Bird Box means like the Born Identity. It's basically this
Mm.
is true. There's a Japanese jellyfish called the Irukandji jellyfish. This is the plot of my 4th book. There's a Japanese jellyfish called the Irukandji jellyfish. It's a specific jellyfish because when it stings you, and it's only from a specific part in Japan, when it stings you, it leaves you with an impending sense of doom, to the point where you're like begging the doctors who are treating you to kill you, to put you out of your misery. It messes with your head. So what they did is a very evil corporation isolated that protein, put it in the global flu vaccine, and then people just started taking their own lives, like in Bird Box. So they had to get to the bottom of it. So they follow all these astrotheological clues, you know, they learn all about it. But yeah, that was 3 years before the pandemic. You know, and it's like
It
when you
sounds.
start,
It sounds very, very eerily similar to The Happening.
yeah, yeah, that's the one with Mark Wahlberg in the grass,
Yes.
right? Yes,
Hmm.
I saw that too. I watched that too. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah. So
Quick
I
question
don't
for
know.
you.
Like I'm
Quick
sorry,
question.
Essa.
Quick question for you both. So, touching on what you mentioned earlier, uh, I think I'd lean more towards what Deborah said in terms of uh, there probably isn't a need to teach the literalism, because you have people who, as you said, who may not have the grit and may not have the understanding to break away from the literalism. So for those who still see the Bible as literal, when they watch videos, or when they are confronted with astrotheology, there's a huge lot of resistance, partly because they see it as partly because they see the Bible still as literal, and the whole concept of anything astro is something a bit hard for them to embrace. How would you encourage them to be a bit more open-minded, to not see the literalism of the Bible?
Well, I started a YouTube channel where all the books that I've decoded, I've done videos on, and I put it up there. I give them the YouTube link, and I tell them, I go, I tell people all the time, I say, I'd rather be told I'm going to hell from a Christian who's watched my stuff than from an atheist who thinks that my stuff is stupid, who hasn't watched it. What I would rather people do is people watch my videos and then try and debunk me. I've openly said before, I said, look, I don't have a lot. I don't have all the answers. In fact, I only know 1/7 of the Bible out of the sciences, but or maybe a little bit here and there in the other sciences. But I really excel in the astrology. I said, look, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Prove to me that this doesn't make sense, because I tie it into modern day society, into TV shows, into movies, into music videos, into all this kind of stuff. I do I debunk Satan, Lucifer, hell, with my presentation, my intro presentation, and I just tell people, just give it a chance, just watch. I'm relentless when I try and share my stuff with people. I'm at the point right now where I get maybe about, let's say 10 people a day through Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, who maybe 10 to 15, who friend me and reach out to me. And then I send them the info, and obviously I talk about my book series and if they want to see it, this, that, and the other thing. But I make a bunch of new friends every day, and I do not get a whole lot of pushback. I've out of 200 different podcasters, like Eso, you're one show. I've done 200 different shows, maybe about 350 interviews since last June. Okay, and or June 2020, I should say. I'm sorry. And the one thing I do got to say is that I've only had a bad experience on 2 podcasts. And one of them, I didn't even find out he didn't even post until later. I'm not even going to mention their name because I'm not going to give them credit. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to have people check them out. I don't want to give up their name.
Good.
But I surprisingly, for as controversial as what I talk about, and I tell people I didn't invent this science, but I am figuring things out. I get surprisingly low pushback. And I'm wondering, Deb, if you get a lot of hate mail coming your way because of what you do. Maybe we're reaching different demographics. Maybe I tend to attract people who are more open-minded. I don't get a lot of hate. In the comments section, people think that they're wise and they put things in there. The one thing I hate when I do a video with someone and I go back and look at the comments is when people are like, this was good, but you should have this person on, or you should have this person. I hate that. I hate when they're like, have you ever thought of having this person on your show or whatever? When I see other people's podcasts, I hate that. But yeah, no, I'm wondering what your demographics are. How do people give you grief? Do you get a lot of pushback because of the people that you have met? Are you making a lot of new friends? Just like how I'm interested in your side of things.
Yeah, no, so yeah, my following is growing and I'm pleased with it. It can be a little bit difficult to keep up on with having a full-time job also. That's an hour away. But it's I get pushback. I don't get necessarily hate mail. I did in the beginning. But most of the people are trying to save me. They're trying to save me. They're trying to bring me back into the faith. And I feel like there are times where I'm a lot less patient with that than I should be, I think. But only because I'm like, I did not invite you to proselytize me. I didn't ask for that. I was in it for 41 years. I don't need to go back. But when people are talking about the different types of religions and how there has to be a grain of truth that's weaved in through all of them, and that's when I will send them actually your way. And I'm like, look, this guy knows his astrotheology. He's an expert level in it. And I invite you to go check out his stuff. It's not woo. It's not metaphysical. This is a science. And it is it's showing how the stars were hijacked by every religion out there. It weaves, the stars are the basis for everything we have now that is metaphysical and religion and spiritual and woo. It's all woo woo. And so when you see that parallel and you can juxtapose what we see now in the texts, the religious texts, and in, you know, like you said, Hollywood and everyday events and all of this, when you can see how the stars have been used to formulate nefarious agendas, even, or ways of controlling people, then you have a better understanding of what's going on around you in the world, and you have another lens with which to view your worldview. And I think that's very beneficial, regardless of how expert level you think you are in your knowledge of your worldviews now. Open up, be open to these types of things. I think people are probably more open to what you have to say than me attacking somebody's very emotionally tied religion that's been indoctrinated.
Right.
Quick question for you. Quick question for you, Deborah.
Mm-hmm.
From your journey to,
I'll be right back, guys.
Sure. From your journey to when you first started, from when you were first introduced to astrotheology, can you talk to us a little bit about how you first came into contact with astrotheology, and in terms of processing what it was all about, how easy or how hard was it for you to digest it?
When I first came across, it was a Jordan Maxwell video, probably similar to one of the ones that Micah saw, but I was a little surprised at how much sense it made. The one constellation that he brought up that kind of cinched it for me was the fact that the brightest constellation in the sky on December 21st, right, pointing toward the constellation Virgo, that's above the constellation, Micah knows this one, I can't think of it right now, but the serpent underneath the feet of the Virgo constellation. So right in the sky where the sun is being born in, or rising in the sky, that constellation that was the brightest pointing toward that whole setup, that whole nativity, was the Three Kings. And I was just like, oh my gosh, my mind was completely blown. And I realized at that moment that Christianity had hijacked stories that were found in the stars. And these stories had been told for centuries to help people remember the cycles of the stars and how they move and how they're tracked. And it seems like every religion has hijacked these stories to make them into something to follow literally, which doesn't make any sense, because there are so many contradictions in so many religions out there. And because of these contradictions, because these stories have been hijacked and used for nefarious purposes to control people, that oppression doesn't make sense. You cannot have a benevolent God, or say that your God is benevolent, if anything in the text is of an oppressive nature. So it was way easier for me to accept the astrotheology of the understanding in that narrative than it was for me to fully dismiss my religion.
And Micah, as part of your journey, when you started to move away from religion and was looking deeper into astrotheology, was there a backlash in terms of your views or your transition?
With family and such?
Yeah.
And friends? I have a best friend for 30 years, this guy named Paul, who moved into my neighborhood when I was 9 years old, when we were in third grade. His family are born again Christians. Now, me coming from a religious Jewish household, my parents never really liked them because of that. And I always thought it was weird. But because of Paul, I was exposed to it. Now, he kind of went away from his religion. He pushed back on it. We were best friends in high school. We were best friends in college. We went to college down the road from each other in Albany, New York. He was basically down the road from me. You know, I was the best man in his wedding. He started watching my stuff. He got back into his religion. He started watching my stuff. And he told me he'd been to all my birthdays. He'd always come down from Pennsylvania to New York because he moved to Pennsylvania. He always came down with his wife, even before they had kids. And he would celebrate my birthday with me. This past year, he told me that my work is against God and it would be a sin for him to celebrate my birthday with me. And we're no longer friends. You know, this has happened to a couple of people. So yes, I have let people go because of this. People who are too close-minded to see this. My mother is very spiritual, even though she's deep in her religion. She's very spiritual. She does like generational healing work. She does she's a little bit of astrology. She does Reiki. She does Tai Chi. You know, she's very spiritual. My dad is very religious. He believes that is what happened. And I don't think he appreciates how far along I've come and how big this is going to be, you know? But yeah, I've lost people. I've lost people but you know what? If people want to believe what they want to believe, that's one thing. But when the religious people start telling me online, you're going to regret this, or I know the truth. No, you don't.
Right.
Because I don't
That's
know.
arrogant.
Yeah, that arrogance that they tell them. And I sit there and Deb, when I tell people and I go, I guess it's easier for you to believe that a deity whispered in a 14-year-old virgin's ear that got her pregnant than it is to believe the kind of stuff I talk about.
Well, the only way for them to truly accept, for instance, the Bible, because that's my wheelhouse, they have to cherry pick the scriptures. They have to say, no, I'm going to take this Old Testament law and fuel my bigotry against gays, but I'm not going to pay attention to this Old Testament law that says you cannot take a betrothed woman for yourself, which is what God did.
Yeah.
So they have to cherry pick in order to do that. So for me, a lot of times I pity, and I know that may sound kind of callous, but I actually pity some people who believe it to such a degree that they have to be encasing and compartmentalizing some of what they believe in order to hold on to their belief, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, like I don't pay a lot of attention to people who it's not going to go anywhere with. You know, I ignore comments that are just negative, and people that reach out to me, I'll block them. I just don't put up with them. What I'm more interested is people. I'm not even so much interested in people who fully agree with me, who know this already. But where I put my time and effort to actually conversing with someone online, sending them information, sending them my books, doing this, doing that, is the people who are on the fence, or the people who you can tell would otherwise, and this is a group of people too, people who would not otherwise be out of religion if they weren't terrified of going to hell. So you have to unpack that first. You have to unpack hell first and explain what is hell. You know what I'm saying? Because that is such a good motivation. That is such a good motivator right there. But once you tell people what Satan, Lucifer, and hell really are, it frees them. I've got countless messages of people saying that I'm pissed off I carried this religious guilt around with me for nothing. That's where it's at. That's the rewarding part.
Yeah. Yeah. It is rewarding to to be able to help people. I've gotten messages thanking me for my work and my book and cheering me on to keep going. And it's very encouraging. I do
Can I make a
appreciate those
suggestion for
messages.
you?
Sure.
Can I make a suggestion for you? Do people ever hit you up and they're like, I never thought of it this way, you know, this is amazing, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. I have an iPhone. I don't know what kind of phone you have, but
Samsung.
I'm sorry?
A Samsung.
Oh, I take screenshots of these messages and I save them in a folder. And
Hmm.
whenever I'm having like a particularly hard time, I just scroll through them and then it builds me back up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would suggest, I would consider doing that because it is nice to be able to review something at your fingertips like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good idea. Thanks.
No problem. So what do you think, Esso?
No, I like that idea. I think even for myself, I get my fair share of hate. And I do take encouragement from those who send me positive messages. In terms of those who struggle a bit with the concept of astrotheology, and Deborah and I were talking earlier about this, for me, it was something that took me a while to digest. But once I embraced it, the Bible made so much more sense to me.
Have you
Uh,
seen my first intro video? You must have, because that's why you
yeah,
reached out to
that's
me,
right.
right? You
Yes.
saw that. What I try and do is I try and like I go through the 12 signs, I give the keywords, I literally dumb it down. I hope because you could watch Santos Bonacci and he goes off on levels. Like he's talking about the ether, he's talking about the elements. I don't do that. I just stick with what I do. And I just try and really dumb it down. And you'll believe it or not, a lot of first timers watch this and it blows their mind. They watch it a bunch of times. But I know how complicated it is, but I try and make it as simple as possible.
You do a very good job at that. To
Thank
to to,
you.
to communicate it succinctly. You do a very good job.
Thank you.
So, in closing, I think we've kind of touched on it already, but for those who are still kind of on the fence, Micah, you have a very good introductory video, and I've got it on my channel as well, where you break down the 12 zodiac signs. And then you do that before you show the correlation to the biblical text. But
Correct.
what would be in addition to that, and this is for Deborah as well, what would be your advice for anybody who's they've been introduced to the topic, they dismiss astrotheology, not because it doesn't make sense, but more to the fact that religion doesn't encourage them to look at
Correct.
anything beginning with the word astro. So I think
Right.
that in itself is pretty much the first hurdle. What would be your advice to them from that point of view?
Well, I would say that the first hurdle actually for people is the second you tell them that Jesus is a solar deity. Like for the advanced people who reach out to me, I tell them all the time, I say, I literally feel, they go, how do you do what you do? And I go, I don't know. I literally feel like I'm in ancient Greece and I'm talking to the Senate and trying to explain to them that Zeus is a metaphor. That's literally what I feel like I'm doing when you're talking about Jesus. So the first thing is when you tell them Jesus is a solar deity, they go, no, they shut down. But what I tell people is, and not to be self-fulfilling, you know, that I have all the answers, but what I do tell people is this: look, I just went through the Bible. You know, I went through about in my introduction video, I go through about 10 different biblical, well, I talk about maybe 15, 20 biblical stories, but I decode passages from like the book of Psalms, Revelation, Genesis. You know, I jump around. And then I go, okay, you think I'm cherry picking. Let's do the whole book of Matthew now. Let's do the book of Job. You know, okay, you don't think so? All right, well, this is how it's done. And so what I tell people is if you're on the fence with that, watch my other videos. You know, I do a complete breakdown of the book of Revelation, why you shouldn't fear it. I do all of these different, you know, watch my videos, see the same pattern in everything, see the same pattern in non-biblical texts, see that this is the basis of everything. To my knowledge, I am the only astrotheologist that has broken down the texts outside of astrology, I mean, not outside of astrology, outside of the Bible, those texts, I think I'm the only one that's touched them. So there's something there. There's something to say about that. And there's probably many more that are out there. I got a copy of the Colburn Bible. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that. I bought a large print, like a grandma Bible, you know, with Jesus's words highlighted in red. Just a large print Bible, so that what I'm gonna do is, because I teach for Santos's school now, what I'm gonna do is, as soon as I'm done with my 8th book, right? I've got my 7th book and my kids' book with the publisher, so those 2 have to come out. When I'm done with my 8th book and the series is done, I'm gonna start going through the Bible book by book and decoding the whole thing with astrology. That's gonna be my next thing, and I'm just gonna make videos on it, and it's inevitable. You know, any page that I flip to, I find something. You know, it's incredible. So that's what I would suggest. I would say, if this doesn't convince you enough, watch the rest of my videos, because I do a video for the most holy and the most ancient texts, and you'll see that it's all there.
Right. I would for those who are looking at the Bible and saying, yeah, this is all literal, you know, I come at them and I say, look, you cannot use, specifically, I'll start that you cannot use the New Testament to prove the New Testament's narrative. You have to use the Old Testament to support the New Testament. Additionally, using scripture at all to prove itself is circular reasoning. But when you can actually look at the scripture objectively, and you find certain scriptures that kind of give it away, that it's a code book, and the way you have unpacked it and shown that it is personification of the movement of the stars. That's all it is. This isn't woo. This isn't some sort of metaphysical non-science. It is something to look at to find answers. We don't have all those answers yet, but we're getting closer. And so when I have people who are very interested in, like, well, what is it then? If this isn't the word of God, what is it? I will send them and say, go look at Micah Dank's videos and books. Go look at like Myth Vision or Esoteric Thoughts, and there's other videos out there that will lead you to finding some sort of clarity. And wherever you land in a place where you're comfortable at, that's awesome. That's all we're looking for, is that people don't look at these ancient texts as something to be taken literally. That's all we're asking.
Yeah.
Deborah, Micah, thank you both for your time today. Thank you.
So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
This is fun.
Yes.